Hello.
Hi.
How
Hello,
are
Annie.
you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. I'm trying to decide if I'd rather be Thomas's aunt or niece, and I think
Yeah, well, I don't want to comment there.
I think I'm going for sister. So Thomas, we'll have
That's
to
right.
talk about that at some
Little
point.
sister.
Yes.
Well, Annie, thank you for joining us in these wee hours. Annie, for your information, everyone is joining us from the west coast of US. So we are 10 hours ahead. So guess what time it is over there. So really, thank you very much.
I'm hopeful it will get lighter as we're in this conversation. I apologize for the dim light.
Oh my God. No, we thank you for being here. So let's get started. As Thomas indicated, actually, I also believe this is going to be a great conversation, a very interesting conversation, a different spin on, I would say, a difficult topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because when we talk about, like we have seen in these 2 days, sustainability, climate change, climate crisis, like Marcy said, these are really fearful topics. I know for a fact that a lot of people, especially young people, are getting depressed about, what's going to happen to the world, what will be our life like, right? So then I see your headline, our headline in this session, Value of Humor, and it gives me a different kind of hope. So, the other thing I want to say before turning over to you is being fearful and scared usually are not great starting points to take action, right? One would assume that if you were scared, you would do something, but usually, or sometimes, it's just the opposite. People ignore, people shut down, and people don't want to hear about it, which is not the greatest thing to do in this context. So tell us, what your work is and how you are approaching things in this very different fashion.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. I just want to say how grateful I am to be part of this community again this year. And I know many of you in the audience I've met before, and many of you I hope to meet in the future. So I guess this is I'm trying to thread a pretty fine needle here, because I have a strong belief that if you can make people lighten up in some way, then you have a greater chance of influencing behavior. And so the trick is that we're not talking about a very funny subject, right? We're talking about something that is really very easily equated to existential dread. And it's pretty comfortable for most people to think about climate change and become very anxious and very scared, and to find their way to sort of pull the covers over their head. And what I know about laughter is that it actually has, first of all, physical benefits. So when you laugh, you actually increase the circulation in your body, which means that your organs and your lungs and your heart are more alive and more awake. And it also humor also releases endorphins in your brain. So you're setting yourself up to have a reduced stress response if you are able to actually find a way to find a little bit of lightness. Your heart rate goes down, your blood pressure goes down, and your muscles relax. So if your physical symptoms of stress are more relieved, then you're going to be a little more receptive to hearing something that might make you uncomfortable and might make you fearful. So that's kind of the physical part of it. And I don't want to be misconstrued, because I do not think that climate change is funny. Like, it's not a funny situation. But my hope is that if we can bring some levity to it and we can find a way to recognize we're all in this together, then that allows us to focus more on solutions and on collaboration.
This is such a great angle, Annie, really, because you reminded me of this fundamental marketing teaching, right? I've been a marketeer for a couple of decades now.
Mm-hmm.
So auntie probably for Thomas, but never mind. We've been taught that, if you're going to talk about your brands, talk from a positive standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Do not talk from a negative standpoint. And it's not about manipulation, okay? People sometimes misunderstand it. So you don't want to manipulate. I'm not talking about manipulation. All I'm talking about is when you talk about from the positive, like you said, people hear you better. They understand you better. You can ignite change in a more hopeful, positive fashion.
Yes.
Right? So do you agree with that? And how does it relate to what you're doing, this foundational marketing approach in a way?
Yes, I mean, that's very much, and I think you see this across politics and across advertising and all forms of communication, where putting sort of a hopeful tone forward does make your audience a little more receptive, and then you can kind of give the message that you're trying to deliver. I mean, I'll give you a couple of examples, and they're slightly different from each other, but one of the earliest images that we all had of climate change, and this goes back many years, was a lone polar bear floating on a floe of ice in the middle of the ocean and looking very helpless. And the message that was trying to be communicated is, if you don't do something, this polar bear is going to die. And the majority, my reaction, and many people I've talked to, the reaction is, well, the polar bear is going to die whether I do anything or not. That makes me feel like I actually can't do anything. It makes me feel helpless. So unless I'm on a cruise and I happen to run across that polar bear and I can pull him onto the boat, I can't do a whole lot about that. And then you juxtapose that with a campaign that came out probably 5 or 6 years ago, maybe longer, from Nissan, when they introduced the Nissan Leaf. And in that ad, that same sort of stereotypical polar bear actually gets to land, finds his way through, or her way, I'm not really sure, through a city, and sort of is interacting with modern life, and actually surprises this new Nissan Leaf owner by giving him a hug. And it changes how you think about that polar bear. It sort of says, wow, here's an action, granted buying a car, that I can do that actually does support the nature and the world and the regenerative biology that we're all aiming for in this work that we do.
As you were speaking, I was thinking, and I'm not going to name names, but I was thinking many, many, many campaigns which talk about difficult subjects inherently. They put a negative spin. And when they put a negative spin, I almost want to avoid the scenery because it makes me sad anyway. So, I know the subject, it's really a tough subject, and you want to avoid that. So I think, through those examples, you brought it to life. I think it's such an important area that I don't think a lot of people pay enough attention.
Yeah, really. I mean, it's tricky, right? Because you don't want anyone to think that you don't take it seriously, and you don't want people to think that it's all, easily solved, because it's not. It's very, very hard stuff that we're dealing with. So the intent is not to trivialize any of the work that anyone is doing. It's simply to allow people to be able to access it a little more easily. One of the other things that I look for in marketing examples that I sort of collect are brands that have a real sustainability focus, but it's not the thing that they put front and center at first, or necessarily. So Marcy was touching on this a little bit. If you can find clothing that fits, is affordable, looks good, makes you feel like an individual, and it's also sustainably produced, you're at a win-win. So I think about, like, for example, Method is one that I sort of a classic one I always go to, where these two young guys went out to disrupt the dish liquid industry, which hadn't been touched in many years. And their ultimate goal was to have a product that was attractive enough that people would leave it on their counter rather than putting it under their sink. And so they created these beautiful jewel toned bottles, and it worked. And oh, by the way, there's also huge environmental benefits to the way that this is produced and delivered and packaged and everything else. But it wasn't this sort of hammering of do this because it's good for the environment, do this because you're going to save the polar bears. And I think that's really important to recognize, that we're all trying to make good choices. We also need choices that bring us joy.
Yeah, I think Method is also such a great example. I always give Method and what they've done through a personal example as well, as a great example for brand purpose, actually.
Yeah.
How, they imbued their purpose into their brand. And you can look at the product and you can see you can read the purpose on the product.
Right.
So before we go, I mean, I just want to re-emphasize the humor part again, so the value of humor, right? I mean, such a strong, actually, sentiment in this context. And like you said, but let's re-emphasize that, people, I don't know whether you get these questions, like, you're not taking it seriously, or it runs the danger of not taken seriously, this very important topic when you use the word humor. So let's talk about this humor head on now.
Yeah. It's interesting. So I guess there's a couple answers to that question. One is, I was preparing a presentation to the Sustainable Brands brand-led culture change audience in Minneapolis back in the spring. And it was on a similar topic of sort of how do we use humor to create behavior change. And I actually went to ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT to write me a 5-minute monologue in the voice of Amy Schumer, who's a well-known American comedian, about climate change. And, ChatGPT, I think that it collects content from 2021 or 2022, I can't remember, but it couldn't come up with anything that even made me chuckle. It was really bad. And it made me realize that there's just not a lot of content out there to draw from if ChatGPT can't come up with something. And so, to answer your question, I don't think that it's not that it's not a popular discussion, but it's not one that I believe enough people have integrated into their marketing. And because of exactly what you're saying, that it starts to feel like, you don't want to be seen as frivolous. You don't want to be seen as greenwashing. You don't want to be seen as not taking the topic seriously. And I feel strongly that there's a fine line where you can allow people to be humans and recognize the need that we have to release tension through laughter, while also presenting what are really serious solutions that we need to be focused on.
So well put. I mean, having just listened, this is such a great conversation, like right after what Marcy told us, right? I mean, listening to her, you would be like, oh my God, things we are wearing, are we wearing the right things, etc. And it seems like one of the very strong ways to deal with it, to think about it, is really allow yourself to be more human. And allowing yourself to be more human comes also with humor, right? With taking things lightly, not seriously, but allowing yourself, I don't know, you will put it in a much better way than I do, I suppose, but allowing yourself to,
Yeah, it's easy for me sometimes to get my own anxiety about whether I've become the class clown or, the jester in the room. And I have to remind myself that that's a role that's important. There's a reason that those characters through history have been introduced into our fairy tales and into our storytelling. We need the characters that come in and allow people to take a breath and step back and say, okay, what are we all doing here? And so it is. I appreciate the support for the idea, because I do worry that people will think, oh, she doesn't take it seriously, and that's not the case at all. I take this very seriously. This is my life's work, as it is for many of the people who are in this audience, and I want to do everything I can to do my part, but I want to do it with a smile. and I want to do it in a way that we can all survive.
Yeah, and digest, right? I mean, digest the information.
Yes, exactly.
Listen to the information and understand the information instead of avoiding it. You know?
I mean, the other piece of this that I'm just thinking of is there's been a lot of criticism that climate communication has become too technical, too wonky, too focused on, you know, greenhouse gas emission numbers and things that aren't actually very easily understood. And there's, I think the reason for that is because of the push towards so much measurement and so much regulation. It's really requiring companies to be very precise, and that's important. But if you're going to talk to a consumer audience, or even, you know, a less educated audience that is trying to understand what this really means in terms of impacts, you've got to find a way to talk about that, that they can actually understand and relate to. So that also is a part of it.
Yeah, listen to you and take action and everything.
Right, exactly.
Annie, as we're approaching to our close, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, because you are bringing a very fresh, different angle to a very serious and very important and very fearful topic.
Yeah.
And so I'm really hoping that our audience stops for a moment and thinks the importance and significance of everything you have discussed.
Yes.
Because I think this route is a very effective route to igniting change, igniting action, making people think. So thank you, really. And before we end the conversation, any last thoughts that you want to share?
Well, I guess I assume you're heading into cocktails pretty soon. So I would just encourage each of you to, you know, to look at each other in the eye over your glass of wine and tell each other a joke or share a laugh, or at least give each other a hug. I'm really grateful for the opportunity, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you in this experience.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
And have a great morning.
Thank you. You too.
Still to come for you.
Yes. All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you.